Great to be here. I am joined by Noam Bardin, Chief Wazer, the head of Waze. Great to have you with us.
It's great to be here.
Let's get right into it. Earlier this year, your company announced that it's going to be ramping up its carpooling service. Tell us more about some of the challenges in rolling it out in cities.
So we haven't really started rolling it out. We're live today in California and just started rolling out in Texas. But we've basically been experimenting a lot with this concept of how do we share our everyday car. And we have several big revolutions coming in transportation. So one is electrification, one is autonomy, but one is really the move away from ownership of cars. And our mission at Waze has always been about fighting traffic, let's say outsmarting traffic together. And we've kind of reached a point now that we kind of run out of options. There are only so many roads, so many lanes, and there are way too many cars. And it doesn't compute. So we kind of load balance the roads in many areas, but still there just isn't enough capacity. And we look at carpooling. If we can get a fraction of the people to actually share their car with others, we can radically change the traffic situation. And it's a problem because we're asking everyone to be slightly uncomfortable in return for massive societal gains, which is obviously a challenge for every individual. And that's where we've been spending a lot of our time, really understanding how do you get people in together? The challenges here are not so much technical, but they're more sort of social, or how do you engineer social experiences?
And that brings me to my next question. I mean, you said that the whole thing is getting people to agree, kind of sign this contract to do something that's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. How do you get people to do that then? How do you socially engineer an experience?
So it's interesting. It's not actually uncomfortable when you do it. It's uncomfortable when you think of it.
Yeah.
So our biggest predictor of if someone is going to pick you up is have they ridden with you before? So before they've ever ridden with you, they will not be willing to do any kind of detour. They want money for it, etc. Once they know you and they've actually ridden together, they will drive 15 minutes out of their way to pick you up. And we're humans at the end of the day. We are social creatures. We forget about it in today's world where we sit alone and play with our phones, whatever. But we were born to be in societies and to be in communities and to interact with people. So once people actually try the service, they're hooked. We get over 75% of people who've tried once, try again, and want to continue with the service. Great retention. The big challenge, of course, is how do you get over those hurdles, those social hurdles.
How do you get someone to go that first time then?
So it's complicated. A lot of that has been, what we've seen is there's sort of clusters of value that are created with carpooling. There's some people that live in urban deserts where there really is no transportation and they have no choice. So they're willing to go way out of their way. There are people that take 2 hours on public transit where it will take 15 minutes by car, but they just don't have a car, right? There are people that are believers. These are all sort of early adopters, which is the stage that we're definitely in. But when we look deeper into the market, the issue of parking a lot of times is the most expensive part of your commute, and it could take the most amount of time. The issue of tolls and HOV lanes. So we just launched an HOV feature, and we're actually looking at the time and ETAs between HOV and non-HOV. If I can save you 12, 15 minutes on your commute from San Francisco to Mountain View, getting that HOV lane is important enough for you to go a long way. And so there are a lot of different values that carpooling creates. Obviously, for society, it creates a lot of value, but for each individual, it's a different story. And this is part of our product challenge. How do we surface that value to the right user?
How are you unique from a Lyft or an Uber, let's say?
So ride-sharing and carpooling are very different industries or offers. Carpooling has been tried since the Second World War. I think a lot of people know the sign of if you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. And basically, this was the US government trying to convince people to carpool. The logic has been there. In the 70s, the US government spent a lot of money on this. Companies have tried this. But at the end of the day, it is a societal challenge. It's a consumer challenge of how do you actually interact with people. Ride-sharing is very much taking an existing model of taxis, transportation, et cetera, and taking it way ahead. So what Uber and Lyft have managed to do is just phenomenal in terms of changing our mindset. I think all of these different services, they'll go from the same premise. It's about moving away from ownership of cars to transportation as a service. And this does not necessarily have to do with autonomy or electrification, right? A lot of people conflate everything together. And if we think about, I think about today, what Uber and Lyft have done for me, I don't rent a car anywhere I go. It's gone. And I find it strange, the idea of renting a car now. Right? And when you think about it, if you extrapolate it out, my eldest daughter is 14. she's not going to be getting a driver's license. She's not going to understand why does she need a driver's license if she has her daddy's credit card and an Uber account, et cetera. Like, she doesn't need that. So I think these are the kind of changes we're going through.
Are there some cities over others that are more fit for that type of a carpool service, let's say, or unfit? Let's say New York, there's so much competition between ride-sharing services and public transportation.
So when you leave the US, for example, if you take a city of Sao Paulo in Brazil, they have an odd-even license plate scheme. So if your license plate ends on an odd day, you can only drive into the city on an odd day. That's the perfect example for carpooling, right? Some people buy 2 cars there to drive each day, but fundamentally, those kind of situations, which are getting deployed further and further. HOV lanes is very much an American thing. In other parts of the world, you do a lot of restrictions around whether it's restrictions to time of day, a car. London has its congestion pricing. All these kind of models are about really trying to lower the number of cars that come into a city center. And the more restrictions are placed on cars, the more attractive carpooling is within that environment.
Let's move on to autonomous driving, because you talked about that. When do you see ourselves in a world where it's truly going to be driverless?
So as I said, I think there are 3 different things going on. There's electrification, which is great for the environment, but frankly doesn't change the fundamental economics. There's autonomy, which is, and we're talking about it in cars, but also in drones and in robots and in factories, is a fundamental change to how society is built. And as a fundamental change, though, it is not going to happen overnight. We in the Valley here feel like it's happening tomorrow, right? Like, we see Waymo cars driving around, and we see it's all about to happen, right? It took 20, 25 years to reach a point where we can freely trade a bit of data wherever you are on your mobile phone from when the internet began, right? And this is bits. Here we're talking about real things that we need to transport around. It's going to take a tremendous amount of time. But I think we're seeing really amazing progress. I would guess in the next year or 2, we'll probably see an OEM come out with a car that can give you 85% self-driving.
85%.
And 85%, when you think about it, is not enough for the fundamental change of moving to transportation as a service. But from a consumer perspective, if 85% of my ride can be autonomous, that's phenomenal. And the question to me is very much who's going to create the right models to build the right technology there. So if you think of what Tesla is doing, right? Tesla is collecting, it's charging me a lot of money for my car so it can collect data to build its next car, right? Which is brilliant from a business model perspective. And that's really, I think, the challenges we have going forward. Regulation is still out there. There's enough battery capacity in the world to build the cars tomorrow. I mean, we have fundamental challenges in changing how our society is built that autonomy is driving to. It is happening. It's going to be, I think it's going to be the most impactful change that I'll ever see in my lifetime. I mean, this is going to make the internet seem like a rounding error.
When we were talking about it, you were saying, I mean, the technology is virtually there. It's also a matter of getting people to just literally let go of that steering wheel. I know I've done a test drive in one of those, and it's really terrifying when you see the person next to you that's supposed to be the driver and their hands are not on that wheel. There's something psychologically that's really tough about it.
So I don't know whose car you were driving in, the whole thing, but putting that aside, I actually see a different experience. People get into the car starts driving, it's like, wow, I can't believe it, it's turning, and then nothing happens. The car just drives wherever it's going. It's just like a regular car. It drives you from place to place, and immediately people are looking for the next thing. And I think this is sort of the gap. People are trying to get the core technology in place, but very few companies, and there are a few, but very few are thinking about what does the world look like in that world where things are autonomous. You know, we've got this company, I forget their name, that do these bus rides from San Francisco to Los Angeles at night, right, with the beds.
Yes.
Right? Fundamentally, that's part of this change. I would never take a job in San Francisco and commute from the Bay here. But if there was a mobile gym that all I would do is get in the morning and actually work out on the way to San Francisco, that changes the time completely.
That bus, I think, drives overnight, so you're sleeping on
the
bus.
In that case, you're sleeping. So these are the kind of changes at the beginning that autonomy will bring, in the sense where the time is different. What you do with that time changes.
Keeping that in mind, what's the higher priority then? Adapting autonomous cars for current infrastructure, or changing our infrastructure to adapt to an autonomous future? So,
I mean, definitely in America, we will not be able to adapt our infrastructure to anything.
Yeah.
We can't adopt it to ourselves, right? I mean, our infrastructure is a joke. We all know that. Germany might be a country that would be able to actually decide we're going to adapt our infrastructure to actually do it. Maybe Japan. But in the grand scheme of things, most places, government is dysfunctional everywhere, right? And infrastructure is so expensive, that's not going to happen. And so I think that the direction that most autonomous cars are going today, which is let's take for granted the infrastructure and let's figure out how we can work within it, is what's going to happen.
How do you adapt your navigation app to a self-driving world?
So a self-driving world, it has several things about it, but one of them really is the issue of moving from ownership to transportation as a service. And whatever the technological solution that ends up being the winner. So Elon Musk thinks we're going to drill tunnels right under roads. Some people think we're going to fly over with self-driving cars. Some are going to drive in the... Doesn't matter, whatever it is, the more people you get into it, the cheaper the per mile transaction is. And that's really the core of carpooling when we look at it. It doesn't matter if you're flying or you're driving a tunnel, whatever it is, how to get people who don't know each other, who are going in the same direction, to get into a car together, share that space, and make it at a fraction of the cost. I mean, we love to talk about technology here, but at the end of the day, most people in America don't live here in the Bay. And for most people in America, the cost of transportation is a big part of their budget. And cost is really going to be what's driving a lot of this market. So technology is cool and important and everything, but if we can't bring down the cost to something fractional, we don't really change the market itself.
How do you bring down that cost then?
So a lot of things are going on today. I think Lyft and Uber have done a phenomenal job of lowering our costs pretty dramatically, right? It's still at the point where it's very expensive to commute from San Francisco to Mountain View in an Uber, right? But it's getting better with Uber Pool, with Lyft Line. Carpooling is going to bring that down more dramatically. We believe we're about a quarter of the price of a Uber or a Lyft. Self-driving cars are going to take the driver out. Obviously, once the cars become cheap enough and we can produce enough of them, but like, if you think 15 years forward or whatever it is, these cars are going to be cheaper than anything else and will probably look different within our current cars. Right? We're still very much seeing an existing car that drives itself. We haven't yet begun seeing, okay, what is this whole thing going to look like when you don't have a steering wheel and you don't need a driver and you could be doing all kinds of other things in the car instead of driving.
Sure. Let's talk about the Israeli startup scene. You've made some remarks about Israel's startup nation status. Do you think Israeli startups need to do more to earn Silicon Valley's attention, or do you think it's the other way around?
So Waze got started in Israel. Today, most of our engineering and product is in Israel. Some of it's in New York. But over half of the company is based in Israel. Israel has a phenomenal technology base, and people have written about it, et cetera, et cetera. I think that Israel is not very different than other technology centers. So you go to Stockholm, or you can go to Finland, or you can go to all kinds of places where you're going to get really strong technology clusters. And then there's always going to be this article about, is Stockholm the new Silicon Valley? Is Tel Aviv the new Silicon Valley? And frankly, unless you can get Facebook, Google, Apple, et cetera, to build their headquarters in your center and move, you're never going to create another Silicon Valley. And that's the challenge that companies have that are outside of Silicon Valley. The old way used to be VCs in Silicon Valley only invested in companies that they could ride their bike to, right? And that's changing. But I think the onus is actually on the startup. If you're a startup based in Israel or Finland or wherever you're based, it's your problem to figure out how to connect to Silicon Valley. The pace that things happen here are hard to explain. And I've met many entrepreneurs who've moved here. I have yet to meet someone who says, I moved too early. I've met a lot of people who said I moved too late.
Yeah.
But no one ever says I moved too early, right? There's a pace of innovation that happens here, and the pace of the combination of technology and business and financing and everything that happens together, which is challenging for any company not based here.
But if you are based elsewhere and you have a footprint here, an office with staff or whatnot, what's the difference?
That's a skill set. So how do you manage a company with a 10-hour time zone difference? How do you actually make decisions and not across this time zone? How do you actually hit the market with something that the market cares about? By the way, Silicon Valley has the same kind of problem, right? We're developing products for ourselves, not for anyone else in the world, right? But so that's,
not to mention getting talent to come to a place where housing costs are astronomical.
And then there's a huge advantage in Israel and other places of the cost of talent, the quality of talent, there's a churn function of talent in Silicon Valley that you don't get in other countries and other companies, right? There's a certain patriotism about your company that doesn't really exist so much. I think Silicon Valley is much more of a mercenary kind of a culture. But at the end of the day, you think about an entrepreneur in China. He doesn't care about Silicon Valley. His market's in China. It's a large enough market. He is going to be, everything's done there. It doesn't really matter. But if you want to build a global brand and you're coming, you have to be able to make it successful in Silicon Valley. If you're successful here, you'll be successful anywhere. If you're successful somewhere else, it doesn't mean anything about being successful here.
In addition to leading Waze, you're also on the board of Aerobotics, an Israeli company specializing in autonomous industrial drones. Tell us a little bit about that and what you're seeing in the drone market in Israel.
So I think, so drones, to me, autonomy is a fundamental change in how we organize our society and how we organize our economy. And it's coming from a variety of places. So cars are obviously a place where I'm definitely involved in. But drones are another fascinating space. And we have also production means in factories, in 3D printing, et cetera. And this is going to restructure how we do fundamental things, right? How do we move things in the world? And I think we're building towards a world where you'll be able to move any physical thing, whether it's a person or a box or food, anywhere at a practically zero cost. And in that world, a lot of things change, right? Why do you need a kitchen if you can have your kitchen be 3 miles away with a professional chef cooking, a professional robot chef who's cooking any kind of meal you could ever imagine? Why would you have a refrigerator in your house where you have food that's degrading and you're trying to actually manage your own supply chain of how much milk do I need, right? All these kinds of things will fundamentally change. So drones are a big part of that. And Aerobotics is a fascinating company there. The challenge I think that drones have similar to autonomous cars is how do you jumpstart your business in a way that you can actually work before the regulation catches up with the technology. And what Aerobotics have done is they're focused very much on factories, industrial location, mines, ports, some of the nastiest places in the world. And they're flying autonomously within those constraints of that territory. And that's giving them the ability to fly hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of flight hours in real scenarios in the real world where they're surrounded by such dangerous materials that they're probably the safest thing sort of in that place. They're not flying over, civilian areas, and they're building up that autonomous expertise. So they have a robotic box that you put in your facility, and literally it'll run, it'll open up, a drone will fly out, it'll do missions, it'll come back, it'll change its batteries, it'll change its cameras, it'll go out again, and everything without any human intervention. And this is what we're going to have in every street corner, 10, 15 years, right? But to get there, just like Tesla needs to have me driving around for it to collect the data, Aerobotics is doing that in mines and other places with customers today so that it can get those flight hours.
And when you're talking about bringing food from a remote kitchen, then that has definite implications for the DoorDashes of the world, right?
I mean, it's literally anything, right? We think about Amazon and we think about what Amazon Prime has done for us, right? Well, now what if Amazon Prime is real time? And literally you want a screwdriver, you click screwdriver, and within 7 minutes the screwdriver shows up. And you screw in whatever you want, and then you throw the screwdriver away and it goes away somewhere. Right? I mean, that's the kind of world we'll be thinking about. I have probably 10 different screwdrivers in my house, because each time I can't find them, and I probably use my screwdrivers once every 2 months, right? And these screwdrivers just sit there. But this is sort of how the world was organized. When we look 10, 20 years to the future, my kids will definitely have a very different world that's organized differently. And just like Amazon Prime changed my life, that's all I buy from, is Amazon Prime. Right? I don't even go to stores anymore. Sure. For them, it's going to be even much more extreme, right? This is just the beginning of what autonomy can look like. I
want to quickly talk about company culture. When we were chatting earlier, you mentioned how critical that is to the success of a company. It was a while ago that Waze was acquired by Google. How did you solve that problem in that mode and have the coming together of these two companies?
So it's interesting. We were acquired in the summer of 2013, and we were just before Nest got acquired and before Alphabet was created, et cetera. But the model was similar in a sense to what Facebook did with Instagram and with WhatsApp. We were left very, very autonomous. And that autonomy has allowed us to operate like our own company within Google. And yes, there are tensions and issues to deal with, but I think this is the model that's been emerging in the Valley as the most successful types of acquisitions. I mean, Alphabet, in a way, is taking that model to the next level of having really independent companies. And I think as Google, Facebook, Amazon, et cetera, scale, how do you create smaller and smaller units that can preserve their DNA, their culture, especially when they do things that are very different? I mean, if you're building hardware and you're building the Pixel phone, you're very different than if you're working on search. You're very different working on photos or health, as we saw before. And so being able to create those smaller units where you do have that cohesive culture and process where people can control the destiny of their unit. I mean, empowerment of the individual is a lot what technology can give us, but we need that infrastructure for that.
Do Wazers see themselves as Wazers or Googlers?
So this was an ongoing issue. I think today they see themselves as Wazers. We actually have our own emails back. So I'm Noam at Waze. I'm not N. Bardin at Google anymore. And I think these are the kind of changes that go back into culture. Culture is an intangible, but it's very, very clear what it is when you see it or when it's broken.
Great. Okay, underrated or overrated?
All right.
Are you ready? Bitcoin.
Overrated.
Do you have any?
That's why.
Exactly.
If I had it, I would have said it's underrated.
Yeah. Blockchain.
Blockchain, underrated.
AI.
Overrated.
Facebook.
Underrated.
Google.
Way underrated.
Oh. Autonomous cars.
Both. I think they're underrated in what they're going to change, and they're overrated in how fast they're going to come.
Amazon.
Way underrated.
Data security.
That's a tough one. I would say it's overrated in the sense of how secure it is.
Tesla.
Underrated.
And Uber.
Underrated.
Great. Noam Bardin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.